go ahead and proceed with your talk.
Okay.
Matt's going to do the Q&A afterwards. He'll be the person in the crowd to go out and solicit questions.
I mean, if he can work on it, we'll show it at the end.
Well, I'll try, but no.
Okay. Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming to the Comparative Perspectives Pakistan Lawyers Movement Defending the Rule of Law and Justice. This is in celebration of Constitution Day, so I'm absolutely thrilled to see this many people want to come and celebrate the signing of our Constitution. On behalf of the Dean, I welcome you. I'm the Associate Dean of Faculty Research and Development and Professor of Law at West Virginia University, and I have also Professor Jim Friedberg, who has been working on this issue with me, and we are wonderfully lucky to have our esteemed guest, Fauzia Kasuri, who will be addressing you on the intricacies of this movement, and it's a very compelling story I hope you will find. We may not be able to get the pictures to show you, but we'll send you the links later. We will give you enough of the images through the description that Fauzia is going to be able to give to you. So I mentioned Constitution Day as a celebration of the Constitution because of the signing on September 17, 1787, and it happens to be the reason why we're celebrating it at our institution is because Senator Byrd, our own senator of West Virginia, passed that, was integral to it, and actually the sponsor of the bill that created this day and asked that each institution that receives public funding honor it by talking about topics that are compelling underneath the Constitution. So this year we felt it would be wonderful to celebrate the lawyers' movement in Pakistan as a celebration of constitutionalism in Pakistan and talking about how that relates to constitutionalism here in the U.S. Former President Musharraf, who rose to power in a military coup in 1999, claimed near the end of his term that he introduced the essence of democracy in Pakistan. In fact, Musharraf imposed martial law in Pakistan. He removed scores of judges, arrested lawyers, judges, and activists. He foreclosed all avenues to judicial tribunals to challenge any executive decisions, and he clamped down on the freedom of the press and on the freedom of speech for individuals. Although he is no longer in power, the scars to the rule of law remain. So you have to ask yourself, what is the heart of a constitutional democracy? In the U.S., we are fortunate in many respects because we can see, even when we have tensions, the tensions can work themselves out in a way that helps all of the citizens have their rights protected. So not all democracies are alike, which Professor Friedberg will later discuss, comparative constitutionalism and the difficulties that nations may face in transitioning to democracy. But certain ingredients to any constitutional democracy are essential. In the United States, the essential ingredient, one of them, is the independent judiciary. And the independent judiciary has been protected in this country by the separation of powers and the checks and balances that we have. Although Pakistan has a parliamentary democracy, an independent judiciary and the rule of law are also essential to its brand of democracy, its brand of constitutional democracy. In the United States, many of you have studied the separation of powers comes from the Constitution itself. And I should say that in honor of Senator Byrd, I do have that copy in my pocket, which he carries every day. I know some of you carry it as law students, but it's much to your persecution, perhaps, if you do. But you should be honored to have it in your pocket. But in it, you will find Articles 1, 2, and 3, which many of you know, and some of you might not. Articles 1 represents the executive. Article 1 is Congress, and Article 2 is the executive, and Article 3 the judiciary. And by the very structure of our Constitution, that architecture makes sure that each branch does not encroach unnecessarily upon another, and also that each branch checks the other. So the independent judiciary is also supported not just by that feature, but in addition by the life tenure that our judges receive, all federal judges in the United States, and also the advice and consent process, which is how they are appointed rather than selected or elected, as some state judges are in the United States. Those are critical ingredients to helping ensure the independence of the judiciary, which you should remember is both important on a decisional level in that they don't have bias to their decisions, but also on an institutional level, that they are free from that encroachment from other branches. Alexander Hamilton talked about it in the Federalist Papers, Federalist Paper number 78. He talked about how judges needed to be free from the ill humors of designing men, and in addition that they also needed to be free from the influence of particular conjectures, even their own conjectures. And when he talked about those influences of designing men, he even included, that is even true when the popular opinion would have the judge viewed the case differently, that the judge shouldn't just follow that popular opinion, and that instead judges have a duty to perhaps protect the minority from the opinions of the tyranny of the majority. We should also keep in mind that, as I said, there's that separation of powers created by the constitutional walls in Articles 1, 2, and 3. Alexander Hamilton also talked about that, and he quoted from Montesquieu in The Spirit of Laws in this same Federalist paper to say that there is no liberty if the power of judging be not separated from the legislative and the executive powers. So that is a sacrosanct feature of American law, and it's not to say that other branches are not incredibly powerful. As you know, they are. And in fact, in the United States, the people retain quite a significant power in that we can have a constitutional amendment. If we decide that we would like to change the Constitution, we can do so. It just takes a significant amount of political will, given what the Constitution requires. So all these principles I described, when you think of them, it's easy to think of them as sort of dusty principles or lofty principles that do not impact our everyday lives, but they shouldn't be thought of as faraway concepts. Instead, they're part of, in America, what binds us together, and I think across the world, what binds thriving democracies and beginning democracies together. And when they are threatened, they are absolutely worth fighting for. And that's part of what today is about. Lawyers have a special role, I think. All citizens do, but lawyers in particular. They have to pay attention to controversies, both on the local level but also in the world. And once they do pay attention, they have to stand up to protect the rule of law. And if they believe it is threatened or there is an injustice, they have to speak out for what they believe is right, which we heard about at our last lecture series for the sports law event about the place of race in the law with Dr. Carlos, talking about when you see something that is wrong, you have to fight for that. And this is a continuing emphasis on that theme. Certainly there are times, and we're in the middle of those times, times of crisis, when such bedrock principles, such as independent judiciary, are threatened. And they're threatened perhaps because we need to have more powers in other branches during those times. So you'll see internationally the balance of powers shift in times of crisis, like the global war on terror. You'll also see that shift in each nation. And within the nation, you'll have, like ours, the executive might assert that he needs to have additional authority or more plenary authority than he otherwise might have. And that may be something that he needs to do based upon the global war on terror. But in a healthy, functioning democracy, you absolutely have to have the other branches to check that assertion of power each time within the context of that global war. But still, you've got to have the legislative branch doing its job, and you have to have the judiciary and the Supreme Court doing its job to make sure that it keeps things in balance in those times. In the United States, we've been able to witness this reassertion of checks and balances in the detainee cases. Rounds of interbranch dialogue have occurred when the executive has said that it needed these sort of inherent authority, that it needed greater powers to control the threats to terrorism. And then you've seen Congress actually in the United States strip the United States Supreme Court and other federal courts of their very jurisdiction to determine any of the cases under sort of habeas corpus, if you've studied that, about the conditions of confinement in terms of the detainees being kept, and also the reasons why, and some of them haven't been tried fully, how long they're going to sit in Guantanamo and other places without receiving due process. So you saw the United States Supreme Court exercise in a series of cases, ending with Boumediene, that yes, the court needs to weigh in, and that the Congress does not possess the power to strip that sort of jurisdiction without suspending the writ of habeas corpus, which it doesn't have the power to do right now. And it actually put in place that the President and the Congress have to respect the Constitution. So you're seeing that rebalancing even in the time of terror. In Pakistan, we will hear from Mrs. Kasuri. She will tell us and many of the details of that struggle. But think back, hopefully you watched it on the news and then saw that what was happening there, because you had the same thing with the court trying to be legitimate and trying to issue, the Supreme Court trying to issue many provocative and controversial opinions in order to secure sort of judicial review in cases that regarded even attempts to challenge the election process there. Those were important cases that the court needed to weigh in on, but of course it infuriated President Musharraf, and so you ended up having President Musharraf unconstitutionally removed Chief Justice Chowdhury of the Supreme Court there, and this caused what much of the sort of catalyst for the Pakistan lawyers movement, which Mrs. Kasturi will address to you. During that process, you saw a fight between the branches where the Supreme Court tried to fight back and say that that can't be done, and they tried to reinstate and did reinstate Chief Justice Chowdhury. And then in response to that, President Musharraf basically instituted martial law on November 3rd of 2007. He did this by a proclamation of emergency and a provisional constitutional order called the PCO. And I bring that up so that you think about that, the PCO that he put in place. Underneath it, all sorts of infringements occurred, including the elimination of judicial review. So I was talking about jurisdiction stripping on the United States federal level, but in Pakistan it was an even broader jurisdiction strip in that the president himself, without the Congress, made this ruling that in the PCO that the Supreme Court or a high court or any other court shall not have the power to make any order against the president or the prime minister or any other person exercising powers or jurisdiction under their authority. It went on to have, in addition to that, that future orders made by the president during this emergency time period would also be shielded or immunized from judicial review. And this is important because in the United States, when we talk about stripping jurisdiction, the question is always, well, is there another route? Is there another court that might be available? So listen to this language from the revocation order. Quote, the validity of any provision made or orders passed under the Future Orders Clause shall not be called into question by or before any court, any forum, or authority on any ground whatsoever. That is a complete strip which would be utterly unconstitutional in the United States, and I hope also in Pakistan. During this time frame, there were also 60 of 97 senior judges had to resign. They were forced to take a new oath of office, and if they did not take it, and some of them weren't given the opportunity, but if they didn't take it, they were arrested and they were removed and then ultimately replaced. The court itself, again, tried to fight in this battle of separation of powers in Pakistan, tried to enjoin the government from doing that, but this was unsuccessful because, if you'll remember back even from your Marbury case, the court is always delicate with the use of its powers because if it really exercises it, like if in Marbury the court had decided to issue the writ of mandamus that had been requested, there was the chance that it would be ignored. The court didn't want that. Its authority would be rebuked in that case. And in Pakistan, that is what happened. The Supreme Court issued an injunction to say the president couldn't remove the judges, couldn't force them to take this oath, and President Musharraf ignored that and then replaced them with these other judges and then curtailed, as I said, their ability to review any decisions, any judicial review over what the executive was doing. Then you had a series of people, arrests that were made under the guise of them being terror suspects. All of this sort of being done in addition to the president being given unprecedented authority to make constitutional amendments without the proper procedures, and using the military to try civilians, and also authorizing the government the power to disbar lawyers at will. That was something that came under President Musharraf. We are fortunate in many respects that he has since then resigned, and that's something that Mrs. Kasturi will give you the background on so that you can appreciate where we are in terms of the political context now. We do have, we had an assassination there of Benazir Bhutto, and now we have her husband has been elected into office as of September 9th of this year. So the restoration of judges, however, and justices remains an ongoing struggle. Without an independent judiciary and proper checks and balances, the public faith in the rule of law evaporates. But the hope is, once those seeds of democracy have been planted, courageous people in Pakistan and around the world will fight to restore the rule of law and an independent judiciary and justice in Pakistan. So today, we are incredibly fortunate to have with us Fawzia Kasturi to remind us of these historic events that I've briefly described, including the tragedies of these events and the successes of them. Mrs. Kasturi is the president of the women's wing of the Pakistani Justice Movement, and in fact, she's a founding member of that movement. She is the former president of the women's wing of the Pakistan American Congress in Washington, D.C. She's been a vocal advocate, and I sent you all emails saying she's a wonderful and vibrant, talented woman who we are fortunate just to have in our presence because she is going to shed light on these issues from her perspective, and I think you will be able to see that all these things on her resume that you can read about in terms of, she's had her own TV show, she's certainly battled with the media and in politics and otherwise, but she fights for causes that are incredibly important, and she puts all of her passion towards them. So we're fortunate to have her. And at the close of her remarks, we'll hear from Professor Jim Friedberg, and you all are familiar with him, but here if you haven't had him in class, he teaches many of our international law curricula offerings, and so I encourage you to take his courses and learn about these issues. Today, he's going to share with us some of the comparative perspectives in addition to the challenges of transitioning to democracy, which are incredibly important in these types of discussions that we not forget. So in the end, this event today is simply to celebrate a powerful social movement of lawyers in Pakistan and others who fought with them from around the world in order to achieve and secure a better constitutionalism. So now I'd like to turn the table over to Fawzia.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm very grateful, first of all, to Professor Caprice Roberts and Professor James Friedberg and the West Virginia University Law School for extending this invitation to me to be here on this very special and august occasion of the celebration of Constitution Day. Believe me, it's just a wonderful, marvelous thing to have a constitution that works for its people. The Constitution of Pakistan is no different from any other constitution in the world. It's been written by some of the finest lawyers in the tradition of the British law. It's always the problem is in the implementation of the document. Unfortunately, it's been so rightly said that the taste of the pudding lies in its eating. We have a fine document. It's been, it's there. It supposed to ensure the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens, but because of the political and the very tainted history of Pakistan, we have not been able, the common citizens of Pakistan have not been able to experience the freedoms that one would expect, in a civilized world. Before I go into the lawyers' movement, just a little bit about myself, because you may be wondering where I've come from. I was 19 years old when my husband was 20, when we both were married and came to the States and went to school here. We grew up here as adults. We raised a family. I have 3 children. They're all citizens by birth, and I'm a naturalized citizen, and I take great pride in the fact that I'm a Pakistani by birth, but an American citizen by choice. This is the country that I love, that I myself grew up in. So whatever I say to you today, of course I'm living in Pakistan at the moment. For the past 3 years I've been in Islamabad, which is the capital of Pakistan. But whatever I say to you today, I say not only as a Pakistani, but also as an American, because I value what I've learned in this country and what we've grown up with and the values that my children have grown up with. So just to give you a little bit of background now about Pakistan's constitutional history. When the country became independent in 1947, there was the India Act of 1935 that, with certain adaptations, was adopted to be the first constitution of Pakistan. Then we had, in 1956, we had a general who was ruling. His name was General Iskandar Mirza. He was the president of Pakistan. He came up with the first document, which was the 1956 Constitution. But he was ousted from office by another general, Ayub Khan. And Ayub Khan then brought in the Constitution of 1962. Now, the Constitution of 1956 was supposed to be a parliamentary form of government. But the provision in the 1962 Constitution was for a presidential form of government, where the country, it was a very centralized constitution. The country was divided into 4 provinces that well, of course, and then we had the federal system. They were supposed to report into, the federation, but there were way too many problems. It was a very unpopular dictatorship. Again, it was being ruled by a general, and so he was thrown out of office, and he abrogated the constitution in 1968. After that, we had another general who took over, and his name was General Yahya Khan. He was not interested in constitution making, but there was a lot of pressure from within the country for an election. In 71, we had elections where Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, late Bhutto, Benazir Bhutto's father, he won the elections in the western part of the country. His party gained the majority of seats in the assemblies. But we had in East Pakistan. The east and the western part of Pakistan were divided by 1,000 miles. So East Pakistan had a greater population, and this election had been held on the basis of one man, one vote. Their numbers were greater, and it just so happened that the leader of their political party, the major political party, which was known as the Awami League, he took over. Mujibur Rahman was his name, and they had more votes, they had more seats in the Parliament of Pakistan. Now, this was not a very acceptable arrangement to the predominantly powerful security establishment that was based in the western section of Pakistan, dominated by Punjabis. Now, Punjab is one of the biggest provinces of Pakistan, and most of the people from the Punjab are those that you find in the armed forces. They did not like the idea of having a prime minister from Bengal. They wanted for someone to, a Pathan maybe or a Punjabi from the western province. There was a lot of political chaos in Pakistan, as a result of which the western part of Pakistan went to war with India, because there came a time when the people of East Pakistan, the Bengalis, wanted to secede from Pakistan. It was not right. And I am one of those, and there were scores of people in Pakistan. I was but just a child. I think I was about 14 or 15 years old when all this was happening around 1971 or I think it was 71. And but there were lots of people who did not agree with what our army was doing. We had no business. The Pakistan army had no business to go into a part of your own country and wage a civil war, wage a war against your own people. India came to their help. So it was a war between Pakistan and India. We lost the war. Bangladesh was then, East Pakistan became Bangladesh. It became an independent country. Our armed forces had to surrender to India, and that part of the country had now seceded, and they were an independent country called Bangladesh. At this point, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto took over as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. When he became the Prime Minister, my father-in-law, his name was Mahmood Ali Kasuri. He was one of the most brilliant lawyers that Pakistan has ever seen, and I don't say it because he's related to me, but that is common knowledge in Pakistan. He was a civil libertarian, and all his life he had fought for civil liberties. He was the person, he was part of the Pakistan People's Party because they had a socialist agenda, they had a reformist agenda, and my father-in-law was assigned the task of writing the Constitution for the 1973 Constitution, which is the current Constitution of Pakistan. My father-in-law was the main architect of that Constitution, and he was the chairman of the committee that was set up to make this Constitution. Now, Constitution making started, and 3-4 months down the road, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was completely going back on all the promises that he had made to the people during the elections. He did not want a constitution that would give actual freedom and, protect the fundamental rights of the citizens. And my father-in-law's entire life struggle was for civil liberties. He did not want to be a part of all this, and he resigned 3 times, and his resignation was not accepted by Bhutto. Finally, he went to the press and he resigned, and he said, I'm no longer involved in this constitution making because we're not allowed to do what we were supposed to do or we had promised to the people to do. So that is just a little bit of the background about the 1973 Constitution. It was still presented by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and there was a lot of chaos and political turmoil in Pakistan during Bhutto's reign because he had completely gone back on all the promises of economic justice and fairness and equal opportunities. All that was put on the back burner. It was all about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto perpetuating his hold on power. And the military establishment was with him because they are the ones who made it possible for him to take over power, whereas it should have gone to the leader of the majority party that was coming from East Pakistan. Instead, we went to war, and the country broke into two, and this is all that we ended up with. So that was just a brief history of what happened till that time. Now, since independence, Pakistan became independent from India in 1947, most of our national life of Pakistan has been under military rule. We've had civilian rulers like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, we've had Benazir Bhutto, we've had Nawaz Sharif as Prime Minister, but unfortunately these were very dictatorial civilian rulers, and it's not like they helped the situation at all. So till today, what we see in Pakistan is a lot of political turmoil. Now, General Musharraf dismissed an elected government of Nawaz Sharif in 1999 and took over power through a coup. He promised that he was going to hold elections in Pakistan within 3 months and then put the country back on the right track, provide us with a constitution, and believe me, all that did not happen. From 3 months, it was 6 months, and after 6 months, it was a year. And in the meantime, 9/11 happened, unfortunately. And what 9/11 did for Pakistan was that somehow, traditionally, the American administration has always felt very comfortable in dealing with military rulers because they're unpopular rulers. They're not answerable or accountable to their elect. They don't have a constituency, first of all. And so it's very unfortunate that at the time that 9/11 happened, General Musharraf was the ruler in Pakistan. And it was just very fine for him because he saw that here there was going to be a war on terror. It suited America to deal, well, whoever it would have dealt with America. I want to make this point clear, even when I'm growing up as a child in Pakistan, Pakistanis have never disliked anything about America. You talk about American food, you talk about clothing, you talk about entertainment, you talk about schools. Anything that you talk about, people, I think generally, and I've lived in the Middle East also for 8 years, people all over the world love America. They love everything about America. It makes them happy. You talk about America, you think of Disney World, you think of freedom, you think of good roads, you think of friendly people. Believe me, my husband was a banker and he was head of his bank. We've lived in Australia. I've lived in England for 2 years. I've lived in the Middle East for 8 years. And I've seen so much of the world, and everywhere you go, people love everything about America. But when it comes down to the policies of the American administration, somehow, I'm sorry to say this, and I say this as an American, believe me, because it hurts me too, they seem very hypocritical. We talk about freedom and rule of law and everything in certain parts of the world, but in other parts of the world, mostly in the Middle Eastern countries, and, we put that aside. We support and we offer all our help to unpopular and despotic rulers. And that's not the idea. So then the people of those countries see that, oh, it's the Americans who are hurting us. So when the U.S. government was such a great supporter for Musharraf, yes, the U.S. was giving lots of aid to Pakistan, but it was mostly military aid. And yes, they're also involved in a lot of social programs, and they do a lot of other nice things also. But those things never get noticed because the money is paid directly into the army establishment. They disperse the funds, they use them for weaponry, and they use them to kill their own people. So you can imagine now what the sentiments of the common citizens are. You know, so they kind of don't, they cannot understand and they don't like American policies. So it just gives the perception that maybe these people are against America. No one's against America. They would love to have the kind of system that we have here in this country and the liberties that we enjoy and the respect that, you know, we give to our institutions. We have no institutions in Pakistan because they have never been allowed to flourish or grow. The only institution we have in Pakistan is the military, because it has always had international support, funding. They've grown. It suits them to the way things are. They've never allowed any constitutionalism or anything, any institutions to grow besides their own. So in this background, General Musharraf, with all the American support that he had in his 8-year rule, had become very arrogant. And he was totally besotted, I think, with power. And he was now under US pressure to gain some sort of credibility, a democratic credibility. He had to get elected because, you know, there are a lot of think tanks here in Washington, and the policymakers and the people in general who are aware and like to read about what's happening in the world. They were also pushing the U.S. administration because they could see, you know, we have lots of visitors, we have a lot of think tanks, you know, people from those organizations come to Pakistan to do their research and everything. And they realized that the people of Pakistan are not really against America. Terror is as much a menace to the Pakistanis, more of a menace, because this battle is being fought on their soil. The suicide bombers are inside Pakistan. They have infiltrated everywhere into Pakistan. And you know, life has really become horrible for people in Pakistan because we don't know where a bomb is going to go off. So this war on terror is being fought on that soil. So it is in the interest of the Pakistanis that they want this menace to end. They want this thing to be tackled. But this war can only be won if you have the will of the people behind you. You know, because it's a very complicated situation. The geography of Pakistan is such that, you know, its proximity to Afghanistan, being so close to Afghanistan, India on the other side. I mean, there's scores of problems. And this war can be won if the people are behind you. But the people were not behind Musharraf because they hated him. He was a most unpopular ruler, and they did not like him. And they didn't like him, and with the result that they did not like America either, because America was supporting them. So Musharraf wanted to get elected by the assemblies that we had at the time. They were his hand-picked and assemblies that had been created with his support, you know, financial and otherwise. And he needed desperately to get elected through these assemblies so that he could put on a facade and say to the world and appease America that, yeah, you know, I'm an elected guy now, I'm not a dictator anymore. And that is the time when there was a lot of restlessness in Pakistan. Questions were being asked. Now, the Chief Justice of Pakistan, Iftikhar Chaudhry, he was sworn into office, I think it was June 2005. His tenure was to be 8.5 years. He should have retired in 2013. So he had like about 8.5 years. It did take him a little while to settle down in office first. But as he was doing that, he started to show signs of becoming independent. You know, the different actions that he was taking, the way he was looking at cases, he was showing that he was not necessarily in the mood to toe the line of General Musharraf. He was becoming his own man. And he was, and some of the very important actually things that he did that really bewildered the Musharraf government. Since 9/11, there have been nearly about 600 or 700 people in Pakistan that are missing. It is known as the missing persons case. And what had happened was that the Pakistan government, you know, without any explanation, no one knowing what happened to them, there were doctors, there were lawyers, there were, you know, people from all walks of life that were just picked up, and they just like vanished, and there was no trace of where these people went. And the security agencies were apparently apprehending and getting around and just picking up people that they suspected without any credible intelligence, without any positive or correct information on them. These people just vanished. And there was no explanation as to where they went. So obviously the families, the victims, they went to the courts and filed cases. They just wanted to know what happened. All right, if someone was guilty, they needed to know they were guilty or where they went. So the Chief Justice, now the government, of course, pushed it under the rug, and Musharraf was not interested, that any such cases should come up to the court and there should be any litigation or questioning on this. Now the Chief Justice took notice of this, and he ordered to set up a special cell at the Supreme Court that would hear complaints of these victims from all across the country. And he said that he wanted to know, he called the police departments, he was in touch with the security agencies, and he wanted some sort of an explanation, and he said, let's open all these cases, let's see the file, and let's find out where these people are. This didn't go very well with Musharraf at all. Secondly, there's a huge corporation. It's known as the Pakistan Steel Mills. It's the only steel mill that we have in Pakistan. It's one of the oldest. It's a giant corporation. And in the process of privatization, the Musharraf government agreed to sell it to a consortium of foreign investors, and at literally a throwaway price. So what happened is that the Prime Minister, who's also, of course, an appointee of Musharraf and a close crony and buddy of his, was the chairman of the privatization committee in the cabinet. And the employees of the corporation, they raised a big hue and cry over the sale of this corporation because they said it's a national asset and you just can't throw it away. And because of that, they went to court, and the Chief Justice blocked the sale of this corporation till such time that there was some information, as to what happened and how much it is being sold for, what's going on, and this was a huge embarrassment for the government because they had finalized the deal, and these were foreign investors. So, obviously they were very upset about this. Then secondly, crimes were on an increase in all of Pakistan, particularly in the Punjab province. Traditionally, Punjab has always been very protected. It's a large province. People, most of the activities of terrorism or burglaries or law and order situation, these were always happening in the province of Sindh. But now Punjab, the rate of crime was increasing in the Punjab. So the Chief Justice called and spoke several times to the Inspector General of Police in the Punjab and showed and expressed his concern about this. And he was given several warnings. There were several investigations. And finally, through the orders of the Supreme Court and, of course, through the offices of the Chief Justice, the Inspector General of Police of the Punjab had to relinquish his office. Now, while all this is happening, Gwadar, G-W-A-D-A-R, Gwadar Port, is the third deep-sea port in Pakistan. It's located in the province of Balochistan. Geographically, it has great importance. This is being financed by China, by their money and their manpower. The construction was started in 2005, and the port completed and became operational in 2008. Now, because of its proximity to Iran, to the Gulf waters, to the Hormuz Strait, and to China, China, of course, takes a lot of interest because China sees a lot of economic benefits coming out of this later on in the years to come. The land in Gwadar is going to be a new city. It's going to be a port city. The government had plans. Musharraf government had plans of building some 5-star hotels there, and a lot of they want to attract a lot of business from all over the world. So they had grandiose plans for Gwadar city. Now, what happened is that in the process, they started to dish out a lot of favors to army generals, to influential politicians. Thousands of acres of land was allotted to army personnel, and there was no accountability. Why? And were they buying it, or what was happening? It was being done at random. Now, the Chief Justice took notice of this, and he, again, he canceled the order for the allotment of this land to these people. And this did not go well at all with Musharraf. And he thought that he'd had it up to here and that the Chief Justice was really totally out of line and he needed to send him home now. And that is how it happened that in March 2007, March 9th it was, yes, March 9, 2007, Musharraf sacked the Chief Justice of Pakistan, Iftikhar Chaudhry. This was the beginning of the lawyers' movement in Pakistan. In the beginning, what happened is that even the lawyers were taken unawares. You know, the organizers of this movement didn't know what had happened. People never expected that this would happen because, you know, we must remember that the Chief Justice was appointed as the Chief Justice like only 2 years ago, you know, because Musharraf approved of it. And all of a sudden he was being sacked. And the way he had been sacked, he was summoned to the Army House, and Musharraf was sitting there in his uniform. I don't know if any of you ever saw that on CNN. Did you, anyone of you ever see CNN at the time? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, anyway, I wish I had some visuals. Actually, you know, Caprice did ask me, and I was not able to arrange anything. But if you go on to Google and just type lawyers movement or anything, or YouTube, there's tons of things available on the net. But anyway, there was General Musharraf, you know, sitting in his uniform, and 2-3 other military personnel at the Army House, and they bring the Chief Justice, they summon him there, and they tell him to resign. And the Chief Justice said no. And, you know, this is absolutely unheard of in Pakistan. Traditionally, I do want to remind you that the role of judges in Pakistan has always been one of compromise. They have always, whether it was through, I'm sure that there were a lot of coercive and intimidating methods that were used to bring them into, you know, their fold. But the security establishment has always been successful in manipulating and getting the judges to endorse, you know, their rule, which is illegitimate and unconstitutional. So this was quite something surprising for General Musharraf as well, because the Chief Justice refused to resign. And then they said, you know, they had never really experienced this sort of audacity. And then the Chief Justice was asked to leave, then he was sacked. And he was asked to leave, and as he got out of the Army House, he was put into, you know, these security cars, and he was arrested and taken to his home and put under house arrest, along with all his family members. Now, as the news of this got around and people started to see, you know, on television screens what had happened, you can imagine how infuriated the lawyers were, the citizens. I mean, everybody was in a state of shock. As it is, people were sick and tired of Musharraf. They hated him. And this was the icing on the cake, you know, for him to have just suspended a constitutional and, you know, the head of the most prestigious court in Pakistan. I mean, it was a shameful thing for him to have done. Then we, of course, started seeing on the television screens how the Chief Justice's house was, you know, like completely barricaded. The entire street going up to his house was, you know, there were a lot of police and security personnel around it. His entire family was under house arrest. His children were not allowed to go to school. This is all happening in within a week's time, when people are just becoming aware of the intensity and, you know, how grave this whole situation is that is being created. He had a sick child who was like 7 years old, who had to go to the hospital every now and then for some treatment that he was undergoing. The child was not allowed to leave the premises. There was no television, no newspaper. No one was allowed to go into his house. No one was allowed to come out of his house. Him and his family members and his older 2 children were you're not allowed to go to school. And it was just absolutely ridiculous. Can you ever imagine something so inhuman as keeping a sick child? And what is the fault of the family? But the family was placed under house arrest. Now, while this has happened, the lawyers, immediately there were people who came out onto the streets, you know, in 1 or 2 days' time. They were outside the Supreme Court protesting. And, you know, the reason I speak with so much passion about all this is I have been in each and every one of those processions when I've been in Islamabad. I travel quite a bit. And, you know, whenever I've been in town, I've done that. But wherever I have been, including Washington, D.C., I have participated in the Lawyers' March in Washington, D.C., in New York, whenever I'm here in the U.S., you know, or back in Pakistan. And I have seen for myself, you know, the commitment and the determination of the lawyers. And believe me, for the first time in my life, I just felt I wish I were a lawyer. You guys are just doing great. You're just studying the right thing. It's just terrific, really, to be a lawyer and to be protecting people's rights and, you know, fighting and struggling for them. And, you know, we were just so proud of the way this whole movement started and has sustained itself even today. So anyway, going back, I'm sorry I got distracted. Going back to the movement, along with the Chief Justice, like Caprice mentioned, they asked, well, the Chief Justice was sacked, but the other judges were still there. There were the 13 judges in the Supreme Court, they were still there. They wanted them to take a fresh oath of office for them to remain judges. About 8 of them refused to do so, so they were sacked. Then there were other courts in all the provinces of Pakistan, the superior courts, the high courts. Their judges, so many of them refused to take fresh oath of office. They were all sacked. So there was like about 60 senior judges in Pakistan that were sent home. They were put under house arrest. Their movements were restricted. And one never knows till today for what reason. And how the people of Pakistan saw this was, these are the people who are fighting for our rights. They were not fanatics. They were not religious fundamentalists. They were struggling and fighting and raising their voices for the rule of law. And that is where everyone came in. And before the lawyers knew, there was a whole multitude of people who were by their side, who wanted to fight. There were political parties as well, though I have to say they were slow. And here I have to mention that the political party in Pakistan that I belong to, not for the love of politics, but because I feel that when we take, we have to give something back. I am a founding member of the Pakistan Justice Movement, which is a political party that was formed 11, 12 years ago by Imran Khan. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of Imran Khan. Do any of you know Imran Khan? Some of you do. Well, that's good to know. Imran Khan is a cricket legend in Pakistan, cricketer. And he went to Oxford, and he was, you know, a student of political science himself, and he played cricket till he retired. He won the World Cup for Pakistan, and cricket is a big deal in cricket-playing countries, and Pakistan is one of those countries. It was a very prestigious prize that Imran Khan was responsible for. Under his leadership, he was the captain of the cricket team. And after that, he went into philanthropy. His mother died of cancer. Although his family was able to afford treatment, medical treatment for her abroad, he just saw how dismal and disappointing the conditions were for most people, you know, who would suffer any disease, but cancer is a life-threatening disease. And because his mother suffered through cancer, he decided that he was going to use all his popularity amongst the people of Pakistan and the world, because Imran is known in UK. He's very popular. He has a lot of friends all over the world. And he wanted to set up a cancer hospital, which would treat cancer patients free of any charge. At the time that Imran was talking about the cancer hospital, I was in Bahrain. My husband and I, we were in Bahrain. And the hospital hadn't started, but, you know, he's a friend of my husband. My husband and him went to school together also. And when he spoke to me about it, I wanted to help him in his fundraising efforts. That is how I got involved with Imran Khan. There was no politics right now. So we were raising funds everywhere. Presently now, for the past 6-7 years, I am the chairperson for the Imran Khan Cancer Appeal in the U.S., which is a registered charity here. And I arrange fundraisers for him twice a year in Washington and in New York. And we raise funds for the hospital. So I joined him with fundraising for his cancer hospital. And all the political turmoil was happening in Pakistan, and Imran just felt that, you know, he had always gotten so much from his country, and he wanted to give something back. So he wanted to do this hospital, and then he decided that because there was no rule of law in Pakistan, there was no justice, he said, I'm going to get into politics. You know, friends got around and people asked him, why don't you get into politics? And why not? I don't think politics is just for the politicians. Personally, I think politics is for all of us. One of us who want to make a contribution towards our country, our community, our people, we need to take interest in politics. And so Imran became a politician, so to speak, and formed the Pakistan Justice Movement. And I'm one of the founding members. I'm a member of the Manifesto Committee of our party and of the Constitution of our party. And I've been with him ever since. Now, it's a different subject altogether. Due to lack of resources, you know, we have not been able to spread the message of our political party in the entire country. It's a big country. You need a lot of money. There's a whole lot of vested interest in Pakistan. So we, you know, haven't really made inroads as such. But today, Imran is recognized because we have been in the forefront of this movement, the lawyers' movement. And, you know, he's one of those people who've always spoken locally and with the international media and on various forums all over the world about the importance and significance of the rule of law. So what happened is now that the lawyers took onto the streets, peaceful demonstrations, and it started as small initial protests outside the courts, outside the bar associations, and when in Islamabad, which is the capital of Pakistan, outside the Supreme Court. And gradually, these protests, the attendance, they started to swell. There were more and more people who were coming out, people that you would never expect. And, you know, it's just so funny, actually. I was in one of the demonstrations and I was interviewed by NPR. This was outside the Chief Justice's house. So Philip Reeves, and you know, it's on the web also. And he was just there and he saw that I was one person who was not dressed up as a lawyer. I didn't have a black coat or anything. I was just wearing my normal pants and a shirt on top. So he came up to me and he asked me for my name and he said, who are you or whatever? And I told him. So when I told him my name was Fawzia Kasuri, so he just said, that rings a bell. Are you related to the foreign minister? Now, the foreign minister of Pakistan is my brother-in-law. He was the foreign minister under the Musharraf government. I never agreed with his politics, never agreed with his boss's politics. But we're very liberal families, and we're all entitled to our own views. So Philip Reeves was so taken aback, and he said, you're the foreign minister's sister-in-law. I said, yes. He said, how are you here? I said, well, why not? You know, I have my own conscience, and I have my own mind, and I think I'm doing what I'm doing is right. So the point is that there were just the most unusual people who came out. There were people who had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with being a lawyer or anything, but they saw that this was gross injustice, and they saw that this is the first time in the history of Pakistan that there was a man who had the courage and the audacity to stand up and say no to a dictator. And they thought that this merited support. And they thought that they just have to put all their weight behind him to get this thing through. And this is how it happened. So as the crowds started to grow and swell, there was a lot of media coverage. Now, the media itself were being gagged by the Musharraf government. Yes, it is true that during Musharraf's reign, we had a lot of independent television channels in Pakistan. But that was a business proposition for Musharraf. You know, he was trying to put up a face to the world saying, oh, Pakistan's a growing country and we want a lot of investors here and, you know, we're encouraging. Yes, for a while, media was okay under Musharraf because they wanted it to be so. Because what were they projecting? They were always talking about how good the Musharraf government was and how much investment was coming into Pakistan, how brilliantly the war on terror was being fought, and, you know, all these kind of things that were okay with the government. But the moment there was trouble and they started to show the kind of treatment that was being meted out to the Chief Justice, to the other judges, to their families, how the lawyers were being beaten and brutally, you know, harassed and intimidated on the streets of Pakistan, this didn't go very well at all with Musharraf, and they started to clamp down on the media. They came up with a lot of draconian laws, really, that would curb the freedom and reporting of the media. And, you know, when Caprice mentioned that I had a show, I used to conduct a show on an independent channel, and my show was called The Ambassador. And what it was, I had a lot of diplomat friends in Islamabad. I used to interview a new ambassador every week. and just talk to them about, how it's been for them in Pakistan and where they're coming from, what their experience is like, what are their aspirations once they leave here, what do they think about Pakistan. We used to talk about a lot of general stuff. Now, the first 4 or 5 of my programs were very general stuff. And then the Chief Justice was sacked. So obviously the tone of the program changed because I changed. Because now I don't want to talk about what is their favorite cuisine. I want to know what they think is happening in Pakistan. What is the message that they're sending to their governments abroad? What do they think about what the lawyers are doing in Pakistan? And believe me, that the Canadian ambassador is a very dear friend of mine. And I used to chat with him a lot about these issues. So I went to interview him and I said to him, look, David, please, I'm going to ask you now today, because this was my first interview after the judges' problems had started. And I told him, I said, David, please be frank. And please say whatever comes to your mind, because I want to hear from you, like you tell me that you guys support democracy, like your governments want to see sanity and justice in Pakistan. So let's hear it for the public to hear it as well, coming straight from you. So I asked him what he thought about what was happening in Pakistan. And then, of course, David said what he wanted to say. And he said to me that, we want to see a democratic Pakistan. We'll be here through the elections. And on the show, I just laughed and I said to him, I'm going to make you promise that we're not going to let you leave till you restore genuine democracy in Pakistan. And David laughed and we laughed and it was okay. And you won't believe it that as soon as this show was aired, because this was a recorded show, as soon as it was aired, but the producers of the program got a phone call from the information ministry, and they said, you just tell Mrs. Kasuri not to ask the diplomats any political questions. They're not here for this purpose. And she need not ask them about the lawyers' movement, or else we're going to shut down the show. So the producers of my show came back to me, and I said to them, so be it. I don't want the show. I don't want the show. I'd rather be out on the streets and be doing what I really feel so passionately about. And that was the end of my show. And my show was just a tiny bitsy show on one independent television network. There were so many. There were journalists who were dismissed. They were jailed. Their families were harassed. I mean, all sorts of brutalities that you can expect from a dictatorial regime were truly unleashed on the lawyers and the people of Pakistan and the people who supported and participated in this movement. So, oh gosh, I've spoken so much. I hope I'm not boring you guys. I'm just talking because I want it to be like a conversation, and I hope that you understand what I'm saying. So, now when we come to the movement itself, because of all the support that they've received from the people of Pakistan, this movement soon turned into a national movement. And in every nook and corner of the country, people were raising their voice for the rule of law. The common man became very aware of what their constitutional rights were, because thanks to the media, this was a debate that was taking place on the television screens. And in Pakistan, it's not like there's a lot of awareness otherwise, and unfortunately, we do not have an educational system there that supports this kind of an awareness either. So television and radio is the only source that people can, because a whole lot of people don't even read the newspapers. So this was just a marvelous job that was being done by the television networks and the print media. And people were seeing how the lawyers were being beaten. They were seeing how everywhere the Chief Justice went. Now, he did not go into any political gatherings, but he was addressing the bars, the different associations in the country. And wherever he went, I mean, there were massive traffic jams, and all this was being covered by the media. And one time when he drove from Islamabad to Lahore, normally on the highway it's only about a 3.5-hour journey, between the two cities. It took him like about 27 hours to make it to Lahore, because once the rally started from Islamabad, there was an addition of cars and buses and trucks and donkey carts and horse carts and any means of transportation that were available to the people. They just wanted to be a part of this historic moment. Because, you know, here they felt that this was a man who was leading the caravan to justice. And there were all kinds of people. There were people on bikes. There were people who were on foot. I wish I, you know, had something to show you, like on the screen or visuals, but you can always see all this on the net. But this is how it was happening. And then the government decided they shut down 2-3 very prominent television stations, and then they warned all the other TV networks not to show anything live. There was to be no live broadcast whatsoever of the lawyers' movement, of what the Chief Justice was doing. But anyway, the response and the passions involved were overwhelming, and this became such an important event in the history of Pakistan that even today, despite all the odds, and let me remind you, you know, the Pakistani lawyers are not lawyers like we have a concept in the Western world, you know, that they make a lot of money and that they're really affluent and doing very well. Majority of the lawyers are those lawyers who it's like daily wages for them. They have to make an appearance at the court. They have to attend to their clients. They have to go put in their applications or whatever on behalf of their clients, because those are like their daily wages. These are poor people. Yes, they're educated and they've studied law and they want to sort of, you know, they needed the money. It was just such the hardships that they have gone through. Travel's not easy for them. It's not easy for them to turn out in large numbers to wherever the Chief Justice is addressing, you know, a gathering of lawyers. But they did it. They pooled their resources. There was a lot of money that came in from private citizens, you know, like myself, like anyone else. A lot of people wanted to donate to the cause. People provided transport for them and all sorts of things. But we must realize that these are hardships. And then the temperatures in Pakistan, you know, we have very, very hot summers. And summer starts as early as February, I mean, in most cities of Pakistan. So, you know, it was in that blistering heat with their black coats on, their ties and everything. Yet, for hours and hours, day in and day out, the lawyers were protesting and they were out on the streets. So, I mean, it's a great sacrifice by these lawyers. And let me please also remind you that this is not something that I am saying. It's been written and it's been acknowledged that there is no parallel in history, in modern day history, to this movement of the lawyers in Pakistan. You know, because first of all, the length of time that this movement has been going on, and the fact that it has been able to sustain itself in the face of so much adversity, lack of funds, you know, paucity of other resources, and then, of course, the political harassment and the intimidation by the government. You know, that the lawyers, and I have been too, it's not such a big deal, and I feel very happy. This was the first time that I was ever tear-gassed, that I was in a procession that I didn't know what tear gas was like. You only saw it on the screen, you know, on television news or something. But it was fine, and I survived, and nothing happened. Yes, it hits you right in the eye, and you kind of go sort of blind for a while, and, you know, you've got water all over your face coming out from your eyes. But it's okay. No, I mean, that's fine. But I'm just saying, and then, you know, they were brutally assaulted by the security forces. They were beaten, you know, with baton charges and all sorts of things. And then there were stones that were pelted onto them. And you see, all this was happening because we have a military dictator who's in power. There is no rule of law. There is no recourse. There is no access to justice. And that is why it is so important to have the rule of law. It is so important to have a constitution which is implemented, which protects us, which takes care of our rights. People were picked up left, right, and center. They were apprehended, shoved into police vans, taken to unknown destinations. Some of the prominent lawyers were denied meeting with anybody. No one knew. They were taken to undisclosed locations. People didn't know what was happening. It was just really, like I say, the real, true tyranny of a dictatorial rule was unleashed on the people. So while all this was happening, Musharraf had to, under pressure from the US And of course, the United States was in the forefront for brokering a deal between the Musharraf government and Benazir Bhutto, because they saw Benazir Bhutto as a modern woman and as someone who would, in place of Musharraf, continue. Well, they didn't really want to get rid of Musharraf, but the U.S. was under pressure from within the country and its own people to stop supporting military rule in Pakistan. So they needed to see a civilian rule set up in the country. And so they propped up Benazir, and, there were negotiations. And, of course, I mean, it's just common knowledge. The U.S. Embassy in Islamabad was very active. There were, Benazir was in Washington very often. And eventually, although Musharraf hated Benazir, and he is the one who had said that she is the most corrupt person there could be in Pakistan, and she would never be allowed to come back to Pakistan, happen what may, Musharraf had to succumb to U.S. pressure. The deal was, arranged between them both, and he allowed her to return to Pakistan. Now, when she came to Pakistan, she had already been in exile for a few years now, about 8-10 years, and she was returning after a while. This was a new and changed Pakistan. Benazir Bhutto came back to Pakistan thinking that it would be the same people of Pakistan that she had fooled over and over again, time and over again, and making, false promises and tall claims about how, they stand for justice and for the rights of the people and all that. It wasn't so. And Benazir realized that the lawyers' movement and the restoration of the Chief Justice, the sacked judges, and the entire judicial system, the independence of the judicial system, was of paramount importance, and there was no other way out, and it had to be done. There are various conspiracy theories about her assassination, and I'm not going to go into that at all. But anyway, she was assassinated, and her husband took over. And actually, it was, I forgot to mention that the momentum of the lawyers' movement was so great, and it was due to their efforts, really, that Musharraf was forced to take off his military uniform, or else he had no plans to do that. And then he had to order to hold an election in Pakistan. As a result of this election, Benazir Bhutto's widower, Asif Ali Zardari, he was heading the party at the time. He still is the chairman of his party. And he is presently now the president of Pakistan. But, their party won the majority of seats in the parliament. The next party, the major political party, was the Pakistan Muslim League. This is a party which was headed by Nawaz Sharif, who has also twice been a prime minister in Pakistan. Now, all the political parties in Pakistan who took part in the elections had promised that the first thing that they would do once Musharraf has been ousted, they would restore the judiciary, and they would bring about an independent judicial system in Pakistan. They would reinstate the Chief Justice back to his original position, and that the Constitution would be restored back to its original form of 1973, before Musharraf had made many reckless amendments to the Constitution. And those amendments, obviously, he had made to, firm his grip on power. So anyway, as soon as the elections were over and the parliaments met, the aspirations of the people of Pakistan was that the first thing that the government would do would be to restore the Chief Justice back into his office. Now, unfortunately, although there were, we had a coalition government to start with in the beginning. The Pakistan Muslim League, which was the second party, and the Pakistan People's Party, together with some other smaller parties from different provinces, decided that they would form a coalition government. When the parliament met, nothing was mentioned of the Chief Justice, and the People's Party shortly afterwards started to dilly-dally on the subject, with the result that even today in Pakistan, although this movement is active, it's alive, there is no talk on their part. As a result, the Pakistan Muslim League, which was a great advocate, and they wanted to stick by the lawyers in their original demands for the restoration of the original constitution and the reinstatement of the judges, they left the coalition. So they have now started, recently, they're now an opposition party, and they're out of there. So the way things stand today, I want to very briefly just, tell you what is happening today in Pakistan. Now, just about the strength of the movement, I've already said the strength of the movement lay in its moral character. It is the right thing to do. The demands are right. It is a very unified, very wonderful thing that has happened for Pakistan, that the lawyers have gotten together and they have, we think that they're the pioneers now really for the rule of law for our country, because the struggle, which is very important for Pakistan, it's a do-or-die situation. Pakistan must go back to democracy, because no democracy can flourish without the rule of law. And we have none at the moment. Once the judiciary is restored, the judges are back in their original position, and then the citizens feel comfortable and know that there is justice, then we start building our institutions. We talk about separation of powers, and we talk about all those good things that are laid out in the Constitution in the US. But this is the first stumbling block. So the judiciary has to be restored. Okay. And of course, I already told you, a little bit of the background and the weakness about the movement. The biggest weakness about this movement was the betrayal of this movement by those lawyers who belong to the Pakistan People's Party, which is the ruling party today in Pakistan. A lot of the lawyers had political affiliations, and it's just perfectly fine to have that. But when the movement started against Musharraf, it was totally, totally unified, and everyone was speaking with the same voice on the same platform. But after Musharraf's ouster, and when the People's Party is now the ruling party, those lawyers who supported the Pakistan People's Party, they started to cause dents in the movement. In other words, they feel that it is not necessary. It's really not that important. There are a lot of other economic issues which agreed. There are so many economic problems in Pakistan right now. There's besides the economic issues, there's the problem of terrorism. We kind of feel scared that maybe the country is at the point of disintegrating. I mean, there is so much restlessness. There's no provincial autonomy. We have this war with, this war on terror. Our province of the Northwestern Frontier province is right next to Afghanistan. The government is not able to control the movement of people from in and out of Afghanistan. So there are all sorts of very pressing and hard issues. But the People's Party is painting it to be so that those issues are more important now. We have a government. Let's forget about the lawyers. We have a Chief Justice. Yes, they have a Chief Justice that Musharraf appointed, who should not have been there. The real rightful Chief Justice, who had shown so much uprightness and, who led the struggle, is still sitting at home under house arrest. So, it's not correct. So this movement, I don't want us to forget about it. And I think that the world sees it so too. Because, believe me, although there was not a whole lot of governmental support, I'm talking about internationally, there were a whole lot of non-governmental institutions and organizations that really gave a lot of credit to the lawyers' movement. In fact, Iftikhar Chaudhry was also recognized for his bravery and his courage by the Harvard Law School. I think there's some sort of an award that they conferred on him and the other lawyers who were in this movement. So the movement is not dead. It's very alive. It's very there. But the only weakness was this. And how, it stands today, I don't know. I mean, in conclusion, I would only say that the lawyers have shown a whole lot of dedication and perseverance. And they do have a very strong, time-tested core group of leaders who are very unmoved by what the People's Party is doing. And these are the people, and you know, Etazaz Essen, by the way, is one of them, and he is a frequent visitor to the US and to other capitals of the world, and he'll be speaking in Washington again next month, no, not next month, in November at the Middle East Institute. And, you know, and there are several others, and they go all over the world and they talk about it, and the world does recognize the urgency and to restore the Constitution. And having said all this, what is very important is that these kind of movements, unless they're supported by U.S. assistance and by other foreign countries, you know, that play a very active role in what goes on in that part of the world, this movement will be a lost case. It does need international support, and the lawyers need that encouragement. And I really think rule of law is absolutely imperative for Pakistan to succeed. And if this doesn't happen and the judges are not restored, Pakistan will not succeed. And it is in the interest of the international community that Pakistan should succeed, because the way it is placed geographically, it's a frontline ally in the war on terror. And like I've always maintained, and I always say to all my friends here in the US, that it is very important to have the people of Pakistan support you in the war on terror. And that is how this war will be won. Otherwise, you know, it will be a lost cause. And I'm open to questions, and I hope that I've been able to say something that makes sense. So if you all have any questions, or I'm happy to answer. Sure. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to wait for the room to reach an equilibrium. I was told by the powers that be that I have to use this microphone because it's being recorded. And I promise not to speak more than 5 minutes. There's an on-off button here. I give Professor Roberts the right to turn it to off if I go past 1:30. I was originally listed as concluding remarks, and I insisted that be changed to discussant, because I believe in lowering expectations. I thought it implied too profound and lucid a presentation in 5 minutes to call them concluding remarks, whereas discussant lets me ramble a bit. I'll have a few remarks and then hopefully some questions, and then we intend to open the questions to the audience. I know that there's a variance in the degree to which people are familiar with this part of the world. So I want to reiterate what Mrs. Kasuri has already alluded to, the importance of Pakistan to the United States and to the global community. Pakistan is the 6th biggest country in the world in population. Many people don't realize that. It has somewhere between about 150 million and 175 million people. Is that pretty accurate? Okay. It is larger in population, for instance, than Russia. The only countries that are larger, have more population than Pakistan, are the United States, India, China, Indonesia, and Brazil. So it's a very large, important country. It's located geographically in an absolutely critical place between immense India to the east, giant China to the northeast, unstable and war-torn Afghanistan to the west, and I think it touches Iran in the southwest. Does it? Okay. Iran, Afghanistan, China, India. Those are pretty important neighbors to an already huge country. It is also a nuclear power. It is the second biggest Muslim majority country in the world. It is on the border of the area where Al-Qaeda and Taliban have significant power. And as we speak, there is great controversy between the United States and Pakistan over to how to deal with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda elements that are on the shared border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Just in so many ways, it is a critical country. No segue, because I can ramble. The idea of lawyers being the last bastion to protect the rule of law and the Constitution is something very important to consider for today. And the bravery of these lawyers going against military troops should be applauded and should put law students and should put us law students and lawyers in a little bit of awe. Remember that worldwide through history, lawyers have not always been the representatives of the overdogs. At some crucial junctures in history, lawyers have often been the representative of the underdog. I see Professor DeSalvo being in the audience out there. He's our resident expert on Gandhi, and Gandhi might be one of the greatest examples of that that's ever happened. Final remarks before I ask you a couple questions. It seems like democratic transition, of which Pakistan is presently involved, means a few things. I see, depending on how you categorize it, 4 or 5 or 6 elements. One is the rule of law, which includes constitutionalism. Related to that is civil society, which is non-governmental people acting in public in organizations that promote public interest. For instance, Amnesty International or the Bar Association or the lawyers' movement in Pakistan. Another element is majority rule with protection of minority rights. And I would like you to comment on that, how Pakistan can strive to be a democratic but also Islamic state. Civil liberties and due process, also relevant to Pakistan as an element of transitional democracy that we find everywhere, is getting rid of corruption. And I suppose I would leave you with the question, since my 5 minutes are almost up, how well is Pakistan doing if you created a scorecard for democratic transition of these elements: rule of law, civil society, minority protection, due process, and fighting corruption?
All right. What I have, I'm not sure if I'll be able to do justice, but whatever little I know. Asif Ali Zardari, who is currently the president of Pakistan with the People's Party, it's not like we haven't had a civilian government before. We've had civilian rule before as well. And he's come back again, the Pakistan People's Party. Now, like I said earlier on, Zardari is not new to Pakistan's politics, and his philosophies that he brings with him to this office are not new either. This is a very controversial person who has all sorts of corruption charges against him. And these are not charges that are false. These are not fabricated or trumped up charges. These are actual charges that he would have had to answer if we had a genuinely democratically elected government in Pakistan. What has happened is that because of all the compromises that have been made, his role has been, he's been put in that place. And like I mentioned earlier, Benazir Bhutto's arrival in Pakistan was a result of a deal. And I personally feel that we do not have those kind of institutions right now that have the independence to bring forth accountability, to protect human rights, minority rights, or any rights for that matter. At the moment, nothing has changed in Pakistan. We've only seen a change of face. I think Musharraf has left and Zardari has taken over. The only big difference between the two is that Musharraf was a military dictator. He was president because he dismissed an elected government, and Zardari is the president because he's come through the electoral process. Now, as awful a person as he is and as negative, and I have nothing personal against him. It's not about personality, it's about what he brings to this office. I just feel that this is a bitter pill that one has to swallow for the sake of democracy in Pakistan. As someone who wants to see rule of law in Pakistan, I accept this also, and there are so many Pakistanis like myself who accept this thing only because at least we have now a military dictator out of the way. But as far as bringing changes to the system itself, there's just the vested interests in Pakistan are so powerful. And these are the same people who have messed up time and time again. Asif Zardari was known as Mr. 10% because that is the commission that he used to ask for every and any deal that was made during the tenure of his wife when Benazir Bhutto was prime minister. And you know, there are all sorts of concerns that this time is going to be 100% because he's just that kind of person. They have looted nearly $2.2 billion out of Pakistan. That's unaccountable for. They have real estate and bank accounts in every corner of the world. All this was forgiven to Zardari by Musharraf. Now, who was Musharraf? This is money that belongs to the people of Pakistan. If we had a court system where one could, you know, go up to them and ask, and there were cases against them in the courts, but because, like I said to you, there's really no implementation, there's no rule of law as such, all those cases were forgiven. And Musharraf, when he imposed emergency in Pakistan, which, you know, Caprice, Mr. Roberts just read out to you, that no one could question it in any court of law, whatever he said, he came up with a document called the National Reconciliation Ordinance, NRO. And in the name of political and national reconciliation, this document forgave all the loot and plunder that Zardari had committed, that the People's Party or the other parties, anyone who had cases against them, all those cases were forgiven and dropped to give him a clean slate to start with. So as far as rights are concerned, you know, in answer to your question, Jim, believe me, we want to have that rule of law whereby rights can be protected. Right now in Pakistan, it is not the question of minority rights. There are no majority rights either. No one has any rights. It's just the rule of the powerful. It's the people who are there, and that is why it is absolutely important to have an independent judiciary so that people have that comfort level and they know that, you know, we have certain rights and we have recourse to justice. And that's why it's very important. The judges that we have a Supreme Court right now in Pakistan, and we have a Chief Justice in Pakistan, and we have several other judges in Pakistan. But these are judges who have compromised with Musharraf. These are judges who have compromised with the system as it used to be. And what the lawyers today are fighting for and struggling for is how it should be. And how it should be is that we can only, you know, we need to restore our Constitution back to 1973, to the original document, and then restore the judiciary, have independent judges there, and that is how we make a beginning. Once you have that, you start the process of institution building. And, you know, once those things happen in society, you know, you have the rule of law, all rights are automatically taken care of. I don't know if I answered your question correctly or not.
Let me see if I understand correctly one of your chief complaints, that even though new democratic appearing people have replaced Musharraf, these people have refused to reinstall the rule of law, in that the illegal changes in the Constitution dictators made,
Right.
not through legislative process.
those have not been correct.
And the removal of the legitimate judges both remain an unsolved problem.
Right.
And one would have expected, since the removal of judges was the most recent crisis that prompted the eventual removal of Musharraf,
Right.
that Musharraf's replacement would have immediately put the honest Judge Chaudhry back.
Exactly.
But the suspicion is
Yeah.
that if the new guy is also corrupt, he doesn't want somebody like Chaudhry.
Oh, absolutely, because, like I said, the National Reconciliation Ordinance, I mean, that is something that came about as a result of the emergency that Musharraf imposed in the country. And then he came up with this ordinance, which was not to be questioned. Now, how can we expect Asif Zardari, who is the beneficiary and the main recipient of anything that comes out of this National Reconciliation Ordinance, to want to have it undone? Because to have it undone means opening up all the cases all over again. So you see, I mean, he cannot do it. His hands are tied. So that is why I say this is another imposition on us. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to sit down because I'm much more comfortable sitting down.
I just want to thank you for coming, and I just want to thank you for all the good work you're doing in Pakistan. I just have one question. Do you think that the lawyers' movement will eventually result in greater democracy in Pakistan by, let's say, power diffusing to the general populace, or do you think power is just going to be transferred from one elite to another?
From one what to another?
From one group of elites to another.
Okay. Well, I actually genuinely feel that the lawyers' group is not an elitist group, first of all. They are professionals, and they, of course, are the ones who are the heart of this movement, but the civil society is on the periphery. They have the support of the civil society members. They have the support of the citizens. Everyone is watching the lawyers. And the amount of sacrifice that they've already made, they've taken all the beatings that there were to be dished out to them, and it's been over a year now, and the issue has not been resolved to their satisfaction. I think this is a struggle that will continue till till it's actually resolved, which will only be when the Chief Justice has been restored and when the other judges that had been sacked go back to their original positions. I don't think that, it will be transferred to another elite group, because there is so much more awareness in Pakistan today. It's never been like this. Like I mentioned while I was talking, people now know what's to be done. People ask questions. So it's not like you could say anything and just get away with it, or they hadn't seen. And you know what they say, that seeing is believing. And the people of Pakistan have seen so many images of the struggle, and it's all very fresh in their minds, and I don't think it's going anywhere. But, and I hope and pray that I'm right. I hope and pray I'm right, because it's for the rule of law. It would be very sad if after all these sacrifices and, all the international attention that this movement has received, if it were to fizzle out and be transferred to another elite group or something. I don't think it's going to happen. What is very nice is that, there is no threat to this movement from within the movement itself. There's no potential internal threat, at least not in the near future, because those who had to take sides and who they've done the damage that they wanted to do, because you see they're with the ruling party, and so they've left, and they're trying to create this impression that this is all right, it's kind of fizzling out, but it isn't really. And it's for the people of Pakistan to keep it alive. So we just have to see what kind of perseverance they can show.
You will be very glad when I will pronounce your name correct, Fauzia Kusuri. Because I am from Pakistan, and I am assistant professor in political science department, University of the Punjab. Here I am political science student in PhD, and I'm also teaching a course in international relations here. And I congratulate you that you presented your case well, and I congratulate you on your extensive and comprehensive talk. And I agree and I appreciate that you talked about the lawyers' movement in Pakistan. This is really highly unprecedented in Pakistan's history. These are great moments in Pakistan's overall political history. I just want to know about the role of the justices, as you talked about the weaknesses of this movement. I remember when Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry was restored by a court case, and after 4 months in July, and people stood for him, and even people, you didn't tell that people were killed in that moment. They lost their lives, particularly in Karachi, when they came out and they supported this movement. Until there have been more than 70 deaths in this movement. So when Chief Justice was restored in July, then they had a case, though Iftikhar Chaudhry was not on the bench in that case, but they were listening the issue about whether the president could contest elections in uniform or not. The justices or same judges whom people were fighting, those were the members of that bench, they took 18 days to decide the maintainability of the issue only. And after 18 days, they decided that Musharraf could run in uniform as an election, as a candidate. And now, as you mentioned, that 60 justices were removed of Supreme Courts and High Courts. More than 2/3 majority of those justices who were removed by the Musharraf government on November 2nd, they have accepted their reappointment, I would call, because many of them, 3 of Supreme Court justices and more than 23 justices from High Courts, they have accepted that the decision, it means when they took a new oath when they were reappointed by the present government. So I just want to know, I mean, what is the future of this lawyers' movement when the justices, those were involved in this whole issue, when they have accepted that the action of the President Musharraf on 2nd November was correct, when they are accepting the renomination from the present government and they know that government is not interested to restore Iftikhar Chaudhry, who is the leader, who is the symbol of, as you mentioned, that he was the only guy who stood against or said no to a dictator. And I mean, government is now applying -1 formula, and justices are accepting this with this president. So just I'm curious about this, that what is the role of the future of this movement. And my second question is, there's a common perception in Pakistan that the American government did not play a positive role, or this may be wrong, but it's pretty common in Pakistan, you know, that Americans did not play a positive role in restoring rule of law in Pakistan. So you should also comment that whether it's right or wrong. And my last question is about the system. You mentioned yourself that when we do have a different system, parliamentary form of government, it happened though in Musharraf regime, you know, but you remember when Nawaz Sharif was in power, he was a civilian and he was a democratically elected leader. And there was an attack on Supreme Court, and how Chief Justice Sajjad Ali Shah was removed from his office by a civilian regime. So I mean, we do have a different system than the US system, when judiciary is independent, because you cannot fire the judges, you can just hire them. There's a process of ratification, and no judge never ever was impeached of the High Courts or Supreme Court in US. So I mean, in parliamentary form of government, which we have in Pakistan, so judges, they have to face the music, because if you do not change the system, then you cannot ensure the independence of judiciary when we talk or compare with US. Thank you.
In answer to your first question about the future of this movement, I would say your guess is just as good as mine. We can only hope. You know, like I just mentioned earlier, There are those people, yes, who have gotten out of the movement. For instance, the judges that you're talking about. There are several judges who have now taken a new oath and gone back into the system with the new government. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there are always all sorts of political, you know, manipulations and coercions and pressures, and who knows what's going on. But, you know, I can just say, as, you know, in my individual capacity as someone who would really like to see genuineness and, you know, the right results to come out of this movement, that I hope that we'll still have those who will stick by the movement, stick with the lawyers on their original demands, and we'll just see what happens. I really don't know what is going to happen. We can just hope that, you know, it will produce the desired results. As far as U.S. influence you were talking about, yes, the U.S. influences all spheres of our political life in Pakistan, and that's common knowledge. And it was a very strong and, if I may add my little bit, correct perception at the time when this movement was at its peak, that there was no official support. There was no support coming from the administration here, although they like to talk and interfere in everything that happens in Pakistan. But when it came to the lawyers and when it came to Musharraf, they were silent. There were a whole lot of, you know, like you mentioned, Amnesty International. I was at one of their events where they spoke about the lawyers. They have arranged umpteen number of things, various think tanks in Washington, D.C., and have spoken about, you know, the importance of this movement and how the U.S. government should come forth with some support. But they didn't. They remained aloof, and they never put any pressure on Musharraf to restore the judges or to, you know, make things any different. And it's important, you know, because in a country like in Pakistan, you know, like I said, we always see U.S. influence. And because the rulers, unfortunately, are also perceived to be there because of the U.S. support, because of their close ties with Washington, they do as they are told, you know, and I don't know what the future holds for this movement, but we have to keep our fingers crossed, because really, truly, it is a historical event. And the lawyers have made a lot of sacrifices. It is for justice. It is for sanity. We live in a civilized world, and we really need to support what is right. And this is right. Yes.
Thank you for coming to our law school today. I was wondering if I could ask you a question more related to contemporary events and less related to the justice, to the lawyers movement. Recently, in the past couple of days, there's been some controversy over coalition forces entering into Pakistani territory to carry out attacks on Taliban elements within Pakistani territory. And I read just in the news, I think yesterday, that a Pakistani general said that next time it happens, we're going to open fire on any forces that violate our territory. So I guess my question is, one, do you think that's I mean, to me that seems like a really serious situation. Do you think that, are you worried about maybe a possibility of that escalating if either coalition forces suffer casualties at the hand of the Pakistani army, or if the Pakistani army suffers casualties at the hands of the coalition forces? Do you think, is that something you're concerned about? And then the second question is, what do you think the role of the Pakistani army and also the coalition forces in Afghanistan in, I guess, addressing the Taliban elements that are in the frontier? What do you think they can and what do you think they should do to help that situation?
You know, the present situation, of course, is very disturbing. It's a very difficult situation that Pakistan is in, and it's a very difficult time for Pakistan-U.S. relations as well. Pakistan is a sovereign country, and, you know, like I said, the Pakistan army is a very very secure and strong institution in that country. It is the institution that the people of the country look up to for defense. And anytime you have foreign intervention or strikes, like the U.S. strikes, it's fine that the U.S., they're our allies. But first of all, they're not very welcome in Pakistan at the moment with the kind of role that they've been playing vis-a-vis their support for Musharraf. And then secondly, this amounts to, aggression. Foreign aggression. I mean, you cannot go and take your ground troops or forces into a foreign country and just attack. Now, Pakistan is an ally of the U.S., and they have been working together. And unfortunately, things have not been so encouraging in Afghanistan. And like I said, we have a very porous border with Afghanistan, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And we have a lot of people that come in and out and, cross the borders all the time. The Pashtuns and a lot of the factions in the Pakistan army, too, have been allies of Taliban. Now, mind you, I'm not an expert on this subject, but whatever little I have read and know, all Talibans are not terrorists. Taliban are people, they had certain philosophies but they were not all out, they're not all part of Al-Qaeda. In other words, I'm trying to say that all of Taliban is not Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a separate organization. So the Taliban have a lot of sympathizers on this side of the border, in the northwest frontier border in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they have families. And, used to be that people would just go for the day and come back and go and those kind of things. So it's a very difficult situation. The Pakistan army should not be and cannot be seen to be killing its people now, where actually what's going to happen there is that they're fighting America's war against Pakistan. I mean, it's okay to a certain degree, it's in Afghanistan, right? But now if you bring the war inside Pakistan, it becomes very difficult. And I know, and that you may have read, of course, also, that General Kayani, who is the army chief now in Pakistan, he has, of course, promised, and he has said in very categorical terms that he is not going to tolerate any incursion of ground troops into Pakistan. And, they have asked their troops. What is very disturbing to me is that they have ordered the Pakistani troops to fire, on U.S. Helicopters or ground troops. And that's not very nice. There has to be a dialogue on this. I mean, Pakistan is in a very difficult situation, and the U.S. administration should realize that and understand that. And there has been a time when I have said, because this is such a menace for Pakistan itself, I used to tell my American friends here when I would visit in Washington and whatever, and I would tell them that, it's not right. Musharraf is using you all. He's getting all this money. He's only perpetuating his hold on power by your support. He's not 100% sincere in eliminating this menace of terrorism. It's just, he wants to every once in a while hand over a few people and say, all right, so he's cooperated. Or go out and kill your own people. I mean, what rubbish, Pakistan army, they have one of the best soldiers in the world. If anything, Pakistan's army is really very professional, good, solid soldiers. And they have a lot of intelligence, and they're able to do this. And, of course, you all remember, and you know that, previously, during the Soviet invasion, Talibans were being supported by the Pakistan army, who were in turn being assisted by the U.S. Pakistan was the go-between. It is the CIA that went into Afghanistan and taught them how to cultivate poppy and then sell it and buy weapons. I mean, these are not things that I'm saying. I hope I'm not going out of line on anything. But I mean, so it's very complicated. There was a time when we supported them, right? I'm talking about the Pakistan army. And they were considered like really patriotic guys who were fighting to get rid of Soviet invasion and the Soviets and fighting communism. And then so many years down the road, now they've become terrorists. So it's all very complicated. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer all these questions or do justice to them.
would love to thank Professor Caprice Roberts for raising such important and timely issues at our university, for Professor Freeberg always giving his insight and also staying abreast of issues, and for Ms. Kazuri, thank you so much for your time. Today you addressed current attorneys, professors, undergraduates, graduate students, but also future attorneys, and we will be here. And we will be called upon possibly to defend our country, our Constitution, our government, and the rule of law. Just thank you so much for coming and extending your wisdom and knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Really, thank you all so much. It's been such an honor for me. And any one of you, should you ever be visiting Islamabad, please fauziakasuri@hotmail.com. It's very simple. Send me an email. Come, please. I can put you in touch with whoever you want to see. Come address some of our other students. See Islamabad. It's not that bad, believe me. I live there. People live there and no one's mean. And people love foreigners. They love Americans, so don't be scared. Don't go buy the official version. You're so welcome. Thank you so much for affording me this opportunity to speak to you.